Hey everybody, Vince Venturella here. Just wanted to sit down and talk to you all again. Had something on my mind. It's actually been on my mind for a couple of days now, but I didn't record this right away. Just wanted to let it marinate. And it came out of a PMP discussion with William Page, who, if you're not following William, you should. His channel is awesome. Great bat reps and a lot of other good content too. His reviews are awesome, so check him out. But in that discussion, he asked whether the future of GW is to go a more, and Warhammer Fantasy, is to go a more War Machine route. And when he first phrased the question, I thought he meant, are we going to turn Warhammer into a skirmish game? And I really think the answer to that is no. But I don't want to get into that discussion. I talked about that in a previous video. But that's not what he meant, anyway. What he meant was, do you think they'll sort of set the rules, or set the army books, as it were? Maybe the rules underneath change a little, but the army books are sort of set. And then what happens is you just kind of trot out new single units or individual models for the various armies. Kind of what's been happening with End Times, if you really think about it. You know, you get with each of these End Times books, you've gotten kind of maybe a little bit here or there for everything. You know, like you get some Mortarks or some Putrid Blight Kings or whatever. And so he said, you know, do you think that's the long-term proposition? I think that's a really interesting question, because I think before I answer that, I want to talk about the conundrum that I think Games Workshop finds themselves in with fantasy. And that is, we have to buy something. Okay, they're a business, and for them to stay in business, they have to sell something, which means we have to buy something. Which means that theoretically they have to make something we want to buy. That's how markets work. And to me, they're really in the horns of a difficult decision. So let me propose what I see as two possibilities. So the first possibility is what I just described. You kind of leave the army book stable. Let's say you get like a Skaven book out and a Bretonnian and a Beastman book, or when, you know, something like that. Let's just imagine that kind of happens. You get kind of a stable army book for everybody. And then what happens from there is we don't re-release any army books. We leave them how they are. And then we just trot out individual units for a long time. Okay? That's World 1. So here's World 2. World 2 is you make new army books and you change a lot of what's in them. Okay? Now, you might say, but Vince, that's a false dichotomy. Couldn't they just do what they've done previously and maybe make a new army book, but not really change much in it? So, for example, take like the Dwarves, right? When the Dwarf book came out, the Dwarven players, I suspect, were probably kind of excited at the possibility of getting a couple new models to field, but really, other than the Gyro Bomber, it didn't happen. There's a new rumor circulating around that the Dwarves may be getting some kind of big Golem thing soon, so maybe that will, as has been mentioned in many paint-episodes I've taken part in, maybe that'll come to pass. But either way, they didn't really get much as far as new things go. And so the problem there is, or even if you take something like the Empire or whatever, where like Demigryphs show up all of a sudden, the problem is that it's a real tricky thing to walk that line, that sort of middle ground. Because that's not really releasing at a regular pace single models, right, like I'm describing. Nor is it redoing the entire army. It's just kind of, here's the army book, it happens once every 3 or 4 years, and you got 2 new kits in it, if you're lucky. Maybe you buy those, maybe you don't. So, again, that breaks down into 2 choices. They can either make the unit really, really good, so that you're sort of compelled to buy them because it's a really strong choice. See Demigryphs. Or maybe like Brolocks or something like that, right? Or they can just make them sort of in line with the rest of the army, in which case, unless they end up part of like a fairly competitive build, you as someone playing that army could just go, I'm alright. I've already got a functional insert army name here. I don't need that one other unit, right? So, and we know they're going to hit or miss with that, so they're only going to sell to some portion of the people playing that army. And that gets to the underlying problem, which is that fantasy is very established. The armies have been very stable for a really long time, and they are sort of in a situation where a lot of people who are playing have the army they want. You know, I have, you can, that's the way I'm leaning, but you can see that's like 8,000 points of Tomb Kings on that shelf behind me. I really don't probably need any more of that. Pretty good. I'm not like, you know, I'm not up to Malorian levels of Orcs and Goblins, but, you know, it's a lot. And so if there was suddenly a new unit for Tomb Kings, like there was in those Archai or whatever, the Angels, I didn't buy them. Because they weren't that good, you know, rules-wise. I didn't feel like they were filling any missing hole in my army, and so I passed. Didn't get my money on that one, right? And that's going to happen in some percentage of the cases, all the way down the line. So because we have a very established player base with very stable armies that you can go to the secondary market and get, you know, models from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and still basically have them probably work in your army, it becomes hard to sell simply new models from that army to somebody already playing that army. So that then returns us back to two choices. If I trot out a lot of single releases over time, I can sort of guarantee to make my money back, hopefully, because enough of them are going to be good enough that I hit and one of them takes off and hopefully covers the costs, at least. So if most of them are break even or slight profit, every so often I'm going to hit the jackpot and I'm going to make the demigryphs that everybody goes out and buys. Boom. I'm knocking over models that I'm working on. Little custom hell pit there. I'm gonna hit and make the demigryphs or whatever it is that everybody wants to go out and buy immediately. Okay. So that's a possibility. But that, we'll come back to the problem with that in a second, actually. So here's the other problem. Or here's the other solution, rather. The other solution is I remake your army book and I gut out that book and make you rebuy everything, basically. So let's imagine a world where, so in the first End Times book with Nagash, the ogres sort of march. They go on this big march like they haven't done since they exodus from the giant lands. So let's imagine a world where they march off and kill all the Chaos Dwarves. Well, or not all of them, but 80-90% of the Chaos Dwarves. And which I count only as a good thing to see those silly Chaos Dwarves destroyed. And then they enslave the other 10 to 20% of the race. And so then a new Ogre book comes out, and let's say it shares 3 units with the current book. Like there's still an Iron Blaster, Bulls and Iron Guts get condensed into just Ogres of some kind, and then there's still like maybe Lead Belchers or something. And that's it. That's all that's shared with the current book. They get rid of Noblars or something, and now there's Chaos Dwarf slaves instead, and they bring in a lot of Chaos Dwarf war machines and all that kind of stuff. If you're an Ogre player, you're faced with, and if you don't like my example, pick any example you like, by the way. Don't get hung up on the fact I used Ogres or something. You can do this with any army. I want you to sit back and take your army and insert it into my example. Imagine having to rebuy whatever your core troop is that you've paid for and painted 50 of or 100 of. Like, at first, at blush, that seems like, hey, yeah, okay, all of our people have to rebuy, 70% of their army. Great. Money in the bank. But I don't think that's the case, because when I posed this question to Machiram during a paint episode, he said, I think I would just stick with my current army and keep using the rules. I think he would too. And I think most people would. Because I don't like you invalidating my choices. I spent, there's a huge amount of emotional, psychological, whatever you want to say, investment into these things. And, we can sort of tolerate if maybe one unit we liked went away. Like if you were a High Elf player and you really loved those sisters that used to guard the Ever Queen. I don't remember what their name was. I just remember that kid existed back in the 90s. They were a really cool model with like chicks with spears. You really loved those. Okay, well they're gone now. But you can probably absorb that because there's still enough other cool stuff in the High Elves that you're like, yeah, I lost that, but I got Phoenixes or whatever. But you really get to imagine that happening to 70 to 80% of your army. Ugh, nightmare. And I can't imagine people making that shift. Yeah, they can still get new players, and new players will never know the old thing that existed. But I'm sure that even in Games Workshop, as much as we lambast them for not caring about their player base, I'm pretty sure that ostracizing a very large percentage of their player base probably is something even they're smart enough to know not a great move. So I think that one's straight out. Okay. So now let's return to what's the problem with the other one, the single releases. Okay. The problem with the single releases is what I'll call the Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition problem. If you ever played 2nd edition D&D, if you're a fan of it, then like me, you may have a library full of books. Just books, books, books. They just printed books forever. Just about anything. Just tons of them. And it got to the point where your appetite just runs out, even if you really love the thing. I remember during the time when, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I just don't care about this GR handbook or insert thing here. So I can't imagine you wanting to go. There's just going to be a time when you run out of appetite to buy those things. Okay, and single releases have it's a time bomb. There's a fuse on it, right? Where eventually it's going to blow up in your face because people just aren't going to keep buying that stuff. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative, I think, is exactly what we're seeing. The alternative is end times. The alternative is to find something between 40K's Unbound and the old world of fantasy that allows people to build new armies they find compelling by buying other armies' models. And it doesn't have to go as far as Chaos Legions or the Legions of the Undead. And it doesn't have to be a full-fledged ally system or take whatever you want. I know Ant just, had a video where he said Unbound is coming. I'm not sure I buy that. But what I do agree is coming is the opportunity to buy more models of other armies. But I think you can handle it on a case-by-case basis. With Undead, it makes sense to combine them. With Chaos, they used to be one book, so again, combine them. Both of those used to be one book. So there's something that makes sense there. But maybe with the Elves, they don't just slam together the Dark Elves and the High Elves like everybody thinks they'll do. Maybe there's a more precision way to handle that. I mean, time will tell. Maybe with the Empire or Dwarves or whoever else, there's a more precision way to handle that. To allow more flavorful, constructed armies that operate under a different rule set. Frankly, a la back what the old army books used to do when you could build a specific type of Empire army, the Artillery Train of Nuln, screwed with the rules, or a Clan Sky or specific Skaven army, or you pick your poison, it doesn't matter. The idea of the thing is the same. It gets you to go out and buy models you wouldn't have otherwise bought because you have a new option open to you that you find compelling. So it doesn't have to be one blanket thing, like let's just shove all the armies together. It can be very tactical, army by army, and it still achieves the end. And that's what I think the end of end times looks like. A world with more divergent choices of how you want to build your armies that encourages all of us who haven't been playing for have been playing for a long time to go out and buy some other models. While new players who come in can still look at a book and go, cool, that army looks neat, I want to play that thing. And they just go buy that army book and those models, and they're good. But then it gives them a growth trajectory, right? Over time, they get the models for that, and then they go, well, what else is out here? Let me expand and see what else and see what people are talking about. And they go buy a second army's models and integrate it in, as per whatever sort of rule set is there. So that's what I think the world looks like. Feel free to put what you think of that in the comments below. And thank you very much. Have a good one.